Welcome to the New Creation Fellowship Church Digital Worship for July 5. This is our 16th Sunday morning digital service. This can be discouraging because I miss you. I miss gathering together. I miss the simple things like saying hi and receiving encouragement from one another. I miss singing, communion together, common meals, and our sharing times where we could reflect together on the morning's message, or we can more freely share our joys and our laments together. But I am also encouraged. We have done this for 16 weeks, and I think we've done it fairly well. New Creation is my chosen community, and this digital worship reminds me of that. It's encouraging because we have had people join us for worship that would not have been able to join us previously. People I've never met who have experienced God's love in our worship. For that, I am grateful. I'm encouraged because I still am walking this journey with all of you. Even though it's needed to look differently the past 4 months, I'm encouraged when I think of each of you. So welcome to our worship. Old friends who know each other well and newcomers that we have never met. Welcome. At New Creation, we seek to celebrate our differences as gifts and blessings. Our differences in color, gender, sexual orientation, and the many other ways we are categorized by the world. You are welcome in our worship as we journey together, discerning how to follow Jesus more faithfully. This morning I light our peace lamp. And as I light our peace lamp, I pray for strength and resilience for those fighting for true justice and peace. I pray for humility for our leaders, that they may be willing to usher in new ways of being. I pray for our siblings of color who must navigate systemic racism every day and face challenges that I will never fully understand. I light our peace lamp in the name of Jesus. I light it that the true shalom of God, peace with God, peace with others, peace with self, and peace with all of creation, that this shalom would break through the darkness, and that this peace would be a great light. Let us take a moment to center our hearts and our thoughts as we listen to our meditative music this morning. I'd like to invite you to join me in our call to worship this morning. This was originally written by Reverend Leslie Penrose and was edited by me. I will read one, and I invite you all to join me in reading all. We come, God of the journey, a people from different places, different histories, different lifestyles. We come hoping to find companionship for the journey, solidarity for the struggle. We gather, God of hospitality, around your welcome table, a table not yet round, but rounding. We gather seeking to become a round table people, welcoming of all, with no preferred seating, no firsts and no lasts, and no corners for the least of these. We yearn, God of all creation, for a new way of living and relating, as neighbors, not strangers, as siblings of one kingdom, not as them and us. We yearn to live fully, celebrating both the diversity of our human family and the unity of our call to love and to justice. We hunger, God of life, for lives that have meaning and integrity, and for relationships grounded in mutuality and respect. We thirst for places to bring our doubts, our fears, places to express honestly who we are, the thirst for hope and encouragement as we struggle to follow Jesus in the way of love. With the fullness of your love, we are nourished. With the promise of your presence, may we be strengthened for the journey. Amen.
Good morning, friends. I've heard that today in church the word justice will be talked about. And I've got a couple of things to show you that have to do with justice. And they both have a play on words a little bit. There's the word justice. Then there's the words just us. When I was growing up, my dad's work, they had a slogan made onto a t-shirt, maybe onto posters or other things that said, justice, not just us. And that idea being that we want justice for all people, not just us. So there are some people in the world who experience justice regularly, privilege. I'm somebody who has that experience because of how I was born. As a white person, I'm a woman, I'm heterosexual, I'm married, I have children, I own a home. All of those things have me fit into a category where there are a lot of things that will come easy for me. Our nation is working a lot on recognizing the injustice and racial disparities. And that's one area that we've been hearing a lot about lately. And that's the context of the two things I want to show you, where these words have been used. So this is a book that belongs to Eliza, and it's a book that she's passed on to Naomi. It's also a book that's been turned into a movie. It's a pretty serious book and movie, and I don't have a clear sense of what age would be appropriate for you to watch, and that'd be something that your grown-ups could figure out with you. In this book, there is a 16-year-old who is there when her friend is killed by a police officer. And there's a group that gets involved, and that group is called Just Us for Justice. Recognizing they feel like they have to take this on and they have to figure out how to get justice. They have to do it themselves. Just Us for Justice. We're working on this. That's one meaning of using those words. And then the other one is this thing I told you about before. And this is the sign that I had made for my yard, for my house, recognizing that I am somebody who does get a lot of justice, and I don't want it to be just for me or just for people like me. And so I think it's interesting for you to look at the ways that you fit into the world. How do you fit in? And where do you experience injustice? Where do you experience the world not being fair? And where do you experience justice? And how can you use all those experiences to work for this idea of justice for all, for real, for all? That's a lot to think about. One resource I would suggest for families is, and for kids, you too, commonsensemedia.org. I think has a lot of helpful information when trying to figure out what books and movies are helpful to watch. And I think it can also be helpful for you to read ahead of time so you know what's coming in a movie. If you want to know what kind of things show up in the movie, that can tell you more about that too. So thank you. I miss being with you. Bye.
Psalm 82:3. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and please the widow's cause. Amos 5:24. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Micah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Luke 11:42. But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue, and herbs of all kind, and neglect justice and the love of God. It is these you ought to have practiced, without neglecting the others.
This is being recorded for virtual worship on July the 5th of 2020, which means that yesterday was the 4th of July, a national holiday. We call it Independence Day. The United States is not the only country in the world that celebrates an Independence Day. In fact, depending on which source you look at, as many as 163 other countries in the world celebrate an Independence Day of one form or another. The United States, along with more than 60 other countries, all declared their independence from the United Kingdom or Great Britain. But there's a significant difference between the United States Declaration of Independence from Great Britain and the other countries. You see, in the other countries, native peoples declared their independence from the United Kingdom. They declared their independence from the oppression and colonization and subjugation of a foreign country. In the United States, it was a declaration of independence by the colonizers from the colonizing country, while the native peoples remained oppressed and subjugated. The Declaration of Independence itself begins with the oft-quoted statement, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." In 1892, Robert Bellamy penned the first draft of what we now know as the Pledge of Allegiance. That pledge declares that this republic is indivisible with liberty and justice for all. These are statements of lofty values that are written by people of power and privilege who felt themselves to be oppressed and yet were unable or unwilling to see their own oppression of native peoples and of imported slaves. These statements are statements of lofty values, often quoted by people with power and privilege who feel themselves to be oppressed and yet are unable or unwilling to see their own oppression of Black, Indigenous people of color. Throughout the scriptures, there is a repeated call for justice. Whether it is in the books of the law or the books of the prophets, or in the Gospels or in the writings of the early church, it's as if the central litmus test for authentic faith and righteousness is justice. But the scriptures also tell us a lot of honest stories about people who used religion and used their own faith as a justification for the perpetration of injustice. And it is for those people who use religion to justify injustice that the prophets and that Jesus himself uses and express their deepest lament and their harshest words. I'm going to break all the rules that I learned about preaching when I was in seminary, and I'm not going to delve into any one of those scriptural stories or that talk about the scriptural battles, the spiritual battles between justice and injustice. This morning I pray for the guidance of the Spirit as I delve into the ongoing spiritual battle between justice and injustice that is taking place in our country today. I certainly don't claim to have all the answers. I have a lot to learn yet myself. But I want to name what has been stirred up within me in these recent weeks. And I want to stir up in those who listen the awareness and conversation and action that all moves us further along that long arc of history and continues to bend it toward justice. The killing of George Floyd on May the 25th of this year was yet one more example of the continued injustice faced by people with Black skin in this country. The act of injustice unleashed in this country something, and it unleashed something within me that has been suppressed by systemic racism for far too long. Trevor Noah described this groundswell of calls for justice, the result of the domino effect of many experiences and expressions of injustice that have been held before us by the cameras that are so readily available in our world today, but also by the reality that these things have been happening in the context of COVID-19. One of the significant dominoes for me happened on January 10th of this year. It was an incident on the Heston College campus that uncovered the reality of racism on our campus that had been brushed under the rug of well-crafted statements of inclusion and equity. Whatever the combination of dominoes, 5 days after the killing of George Floyd, I participated in my first protest march. It's about time, isn't it? We met on Douglas Avenue at Century 2 in Wichita. The crowd seemed to take up all lanes of traffic on Douglas and filled at least an entire city block. As we walked, the crowd shouted various chants. One would call out, "Say his name," and the rest would say, "George Floyd." The cry would go out, "No justice, no peace." And there were repeated chants for justice for George Floyd. The march ended at the County Detention Center and police headquarters in Wichita. There, this throng of people knelt together. And in that context, the symbolism of kneeling seemed to carry so many different meanings. Were we kneeling in prayer? Were we kneeling in protest after the example of Colin Kaepernick? Or were we kneeling as a way of symbolizing the weight of the oppressive system of injustice that has been kneeling on the necks of Black people for generations in this country, and that ultimately robbed George Floyd of his life? As I knelt there, I pondered the tragic irony of the location of the Kansas African American Museum next door to the Sedgwick County Detention Center. Krista and I had learned of the protest only a short time before it started. We didn't really have any time to prepare, just get ourselves ready and go. We certainly didn't make any signs. There was another woman in the crowd who had made several signs, and she asked Krista if she wanted to carry one. Krista readily agreed and was handed a sign that read, "It's time to be uncomfortable." The sign speaks truth. It is time for white people in this country, including me, to be uncomfortable. Black people in this country have been more than uncomfortable for far too long. We cannot continue to maintain our comfort as white people at the expense of and without awareness of the painful experiences of others. Before the death of George Floyd and the subsequent peaceful protest and localized riots, Krista and I planned to take some vacation time and visit our son and daughter-in-law at their home in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, their home happens to be within a few blocks of one of the larger localized riots in this country. A few people, when they heard of our plans, asked us if we felt we would be safe going there. We would be at least as safe as our children. We would be far safer than the Black people who live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. While we were there, we made a pilgrimage to the corner of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis, the street corner where George Floyd was killed. The place where he was killed, beside the bus stop, in front of the Cub food stores, as well as the center of the intersection, had become a place of communal grief. It's hard to describe what all we saw and experienced there. I've come to believe that it is holy ground. Holy ground from which innocent blood cries out. Holy ground that holds the community's intense emotions of grief and anguish and anger. It's holy ground that spoke with honesty not only the name of George Floyd, but the names of 110 other Black people who have been killed by police brutality and racial violence. These names were printed on Chicago Avenue. George Floyd's name was in front of the bus stop where he was killed, and the names extended for nearly a half a block to the north. But it was also holy ground that spoke of hope. As we stood there and watched the scene, I observed 4 young white girls, perhaps the oldest was 10 years old, as they laid flowers along the makeshift memorial. They also laid cards that they had obviously colored and written. I didn't see their parents. I'm sure their parents were there in the crowd somewhere, but their parents were not standing over them telling them what to do. It was as if these young blonde-haired girls knew exactly what needed to be done at that moment. As they joined the communal expressions of grief and longing for a way of being a society together that was new and different than what we experience today. In the march and again at the site where George Floyd was killed, I heard many shouts and many signs that called for justice for George Floyd. I've come to believe that it's too late for justice for George Floyd. I suppose if you define justice as punishment for specific individuals who commit a specific wrong against another person, we could ask for justice for George Floyd. Although even that really isn't justice for George Floyd, it's calling for justice for Derek Chauvin, who held his knee to George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The fact that retributive justice for white people is significantly more lenient than retributive justice for black people is a part of the injustice that we need to address. But the opportunity for justice for George Floyd has passed. If there would be justice for George Floyd and the 110 other names of people who were on the street, he would still be alive. They would all still be alive. And he would be living in a country that valued his life and valued what he had to contribute to our society and to our culture. He would have had equal opportunity economically, in education, in the job market, in housing. He would have had equal justice before the law. He would have had equity in our system of law enforcement. The cry for justice is not for George Floyd. It's about a plea for justice for all black people and all brown-skinned fellow human beings who are a part of this country and this community. It's about calling our country to accountability, to live up to those beautiful values that we proclaim, that all people are created equal, and to live up to the truth that this is a republic with liberty and justice for all. All are created in the image of God. All have something of God within them and something of God to contribute to who we are as a community and as a people. Justice for George Floyd is really about calling white people to look beyond our self-righteous focus on our own perception of the ways we are oppressed and open our eyes to the ways that I have participated in and continue to participate in and benefit from and continue to benefit from the unjust oppression of Black, Indigenous people of color. Did I ever push Native peoples off their land so that I could have a place to live and raise my family? No. But my great-great-grandfather purchased a farm in northern Indiana that had been seized by the U.S. government from the Potawatomi Indians only a few years before. And in a twist of tragic irony, the farm bordered a lake and was close to a nearby town, both of which were named after the chief of that Potawatomi tribe, Chief Shipshawana. Did I ever own a slave? No, but when a slave was kidnapped or sold, not only was their freedom taken away, but so was their name. Slaves were given the names of their owners, which is one possible reason why the encounter in Central Park between a black bird watcher and a white dog owner happened that they both had the same last name. About 3 years ago, I was privileged to hear an inspiring presentation by Kenneth Morris Jr. He happens to be the great-great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass. As I listened to his story, I learned that his great-great-great-grandmother, the wife of Frederick Douglass, was Anna Murray Douglass. Yes, somewhere one of her ancestors had been owned and renamed by a Murray family. While I may not have pushed native peoples off their land, and while I may have never owned slaves, my roots are deep within systemic racism. I can't just say I worked hard to get where I am, and I have worked hard, but I started from a place of privilege. Given that reality, it's tempting to throw up my hands and say, what does justice look like today? When I started to think about this teaching and asking that question, what does justice look like? I had this vision that I would invite two of my colleagues and friends who are Black to join me in a conversation about what does justice look like. I hope we still have that conversation someday. They both agreed to have that conversation. But last Sunday night, Krista and I watched a movie by the title Just Mercy. If you haven't watched that movie, please do. It had a profound impact on me and opened my eyes again in ever new ways to the reality of injustice in our society and in our culture and in this country. When the movie was over, I told Krista that I can't ask Tony and Karen to have that conversation with me, as if somehow I needed them to tell me what justice looked like, as if somehow it was their responsibility to educate me about what justice looked like and what injustice was. I know what injustice is. I know what justice is. I need to proclaim that. And proclaiming it isn't always comfortable, but it's time to be uncomfortable. Justice is equal justice under the law. There isn't greater lenience for white people than there is for Black people. There isn't harsher treatment or less evidence that is required to convict Black people. Justice is equal opportunity. It's a recognition that you can't have a conversation about equal opportunity without also having a conversation about the fact that we are starting at different places and having a conversation about why we're starting at different places. Justice is about the freedom to live without fear, to live without fear of the difference of who you have been created to be. And it's not only about not living in fear of that difference, but about living with the reality that that difference is a gift. It's not about being colorblind. It's about recognizing that multicolor reality is beautiful and a gift. It's about seeking and receiving the gift of the presence of the image of God in others. It's about listening to the stories of others. It's about listening to the stories of the Sioux and the Iroquois and the Potawatomi, and their stories of their cultures and their relationships with creation, in which land is not a commodity or a piece of capital that can be bought and sold. Rather, land is a living, breathing reality that's a part of who we are. And perhaps if we listened to the Potawatomi and the Sioux and the Iroquois and many other native peoples, we would have a better understanding of how to address the real environmental challenges we are facing. It's about listening to the stories and the repeated injustice that Black people experience in our country, not simply as a means to shame racist people of privilege, but as a potential nugget of truth to help us understand what resilience is in the face of hardship and difficulty, so that maybe we have new tools to address the reality of a pandemic or economic collapse. It's about listening to the stories of Black people and understanding they have a lot more to contribute to our understanding and our knowledge and our experience that's far more than just around the issue of race. It's about listening to the stories of leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and Bishop Desmond Tutu, and discovering in their teachings and in their actions a way toward being a new society together. You know, I can't undo the past, but I can acknowledge it and I can confess it. And I can name that it was wrong. I can't undo the past, but I can listen to and I can retell the whole truth of the stories of the past. I can't undo the past, but I can learn from the stories of the past through the eyes of others so that I can become more aware of how the past is continuing to impact the present. I can't undo the past, but I can recognize that racism didn't go away with the Emancipation Proclamation, nor did racism go away with the Civil Rights Movement or the more recent anti-discrimination laws. It didn't even go away when we elected a Black president for the United States. I need to recognize that racism continues to evolve and continues to change and continues to be present in ever more insidious ways. I can't change the system, but I can work at change within a racist system. I can work at change within me. I can continue to open myself to understand more fully my own white privilege, my own white fragility. I can learn to understand more the reality of my own bias and prejudice. I can't change the system, but I can work at change within the racist system and change within the institutions and the systems that I am a part of, whether that be our congregation at New Creation, Mennonite Church USA, or Huston College, or our own family system. I can't change the system, but I can examine and repent of the ways that my own faith and my own religion has sought to justify a system of injustice. And I can lend my voice to the prophets and to the voice of Jesus, calling forth a faith and a righteousness that is measured by justice and that brings justice. I can't change a system, but I can join with others of all races and nations and dream of calling forth and working for a system in which justice rolls down like a mighty river and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. May that vision and dream of the prophet Amos, and proclaimed again by Martin Luther King Jr., be lived again among us today. Amen. One of the things that our folks at New Creation have lamented the loss in COVID-19 times is the loss of our sharing time. I'd encourage us to try and utilize the comment section underneath this video as a way for each of us to respond to the question, what does justice look like? What does justice look like to you? What actions will you take to help that justice become a reality? I encourage us to begin to join together in this dialogue around what justice looks like in this way. Amen.
we have come to the place in our service where we would like to take communion together. It is our tradition here at New Creation that the first Sunday of the month we share in communion with each other. And I think this is an important piece as we are gathering separately as a reminder that we are community together, that we are in the body of Christ. Here at New Creation, we practice open communion. If you are worshiping with us this morning, you are welcome to partake in the communion. You just need to provide the elements for yourself this morning. Grape juice or wine or water or something to drink. And then bread or a cracker or a cookie, a pretzel, whatever you have to eat at home. The beauty of a video is that if you need to, you can pause the video right now and go grab those elements. On that night, as Jesus gathered with the disciples, he took the bread and he broke it. And he said, "This bread is a symbol of my body, broken for you. As often as you gather and eat, remember what I have done." I invite you to take the bread and to eat. In the same way, Jesus also took the cup, and he told his disciples, "This cup is a sign of my blood shed for you. As often as you gather and drink, remember what I have done for you." Take and drink the cup. One of the things that we do when we gather in person for communion is, along with communion, we offer an opportunity to receive a blessing. And so I just want to share a quick blessing with you this morning. You are God's beloved child. I pray that the fullness of God's love will surround you and that you will know it completely, and that you will be able to rest in God's love for you. Go in peace. Thank you for joining us for our worship this morning here at New Creation Fellowship Church. I'm grateful that you chose to be with us this morning. As you go from this worship into the rest of your day, into the rest of your week, may God bless you and keep you. May the very face of Jesus shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Holy Spirit embrace you and give you peace. Amen.